Probably never in the history of spaceflight have we had so little information about the return of a spacecraft from space as today. Where the fault lies, I don't know, but in this moment of great victory for Gemini 6, we can say on the behalf of the American public, we were certainly given a breathtaking moments here with no information about the re-entry. However, now they're back safely on the Atlantic. The Wasp is on its way, and presumably those hatches are going to be coming open in just a few minutes. The helicopters, when they get overhead, drop the frogmen who attach a flotation collar around the Gemini 6 spacecraft that will keep it afloat even if it takes water when the hatch is open. That's to avoid any possible failure at that point that would cause the Gemini to be lost as that second Mercury.
The Wasp advises they've accelerated their speed. They're moving at 32 knots, and we're standing by.
32 knots, making pretty good time over toward the spacecraft. But once that flotation collar is attached, then Schirra will open up his hatch, and he will be the first to emerge from the spacecraft. Safford will crawl across the console there between them and emerge from the same hatch. Then they will decide, as they sit atop their spacecraft, presumably, whether they will stay with it and be lifted aboard the aircraft carrier in the spacecraft, or will they leave by helicopter, lift up to the helicopter, and return to the aircraft carrier Wasp. That decision is a pilot's decision alone. In the past, all of the Gemini pilots have chosen to fly by helicopter back to the aircraft carrier deck, but they were a great deal further away, and they would have had to bob around in a very unseaworthy spacecraft that's motion without any keel or centerboard or anything to keep it upright is rather sickening, even for the most hardened sea-going and space-going man. However, in this case, Schirra, being the test pilot he is, and the aircraft carrier being as close as it is, less than an hour's steaming time from the spacecraft, may well decide that he'd like to be the first to ride his spacecraft back aboard the carrier deck. It's pure speculation, of course. We can't dream what is in Wally Schirra's mind at this moment, except exultation over the success of the rendezvous mission, a perfect textbook flight as far as we know. Every information that's been given us in this 25 hours since that magnificent liftoff from Cape Kennedy's Pad 19 yesterday morning. We have some film of the kind of maneuvers that are taking place out there now as those flotation collars are being attached, and maybe our boys in the back room who are responsible for all of these magnificent graphics and film presentations that we have been able to show you throughout the flights can get that racked up, and we can see what's going on out there now. That is, as it has been done in practice sessions. Yep. As I said, the Gemini 6 is landed between the Wasp and Miami, although it's a great deal closer, fortunately, to the Wasp than it is to Miami. The Wasp itself, 760 miles east of the lower coast of Florida. The Gemini 6, 30 miles from the Wasp.
This is Gemini Control Houston. Now we do have a visual contact. Air Boss 1 has a visual contact. He should be approximately over 6. He is in voice communication with the 6 pilots.
Successful conclusion of this history-making first rendezvous in space. Dallas Townsend on the USS Wasp. Dallas? Dallas is getting in position there. Told us he thought he'd be ready to go. We're waiting for him to come up.
This is Dallas Townsend aboard the aircraft carrier Wasp, which now is racing at top speed toward the point where Gemini 6 has come down in the Atlantic. At a distance of about 30 miles, the Wasp is now traveling at 32 knots, which is flank speed, at a direction of 280 degrees on the compass, which is slightly north of northwest. We expect to have the spacecraft within sight of the carrier within a few minutes. It already has been sighted by the air boss, the on-scene commander, and by Search 2, the recovery helicopter. Now down to Bernard Eisman on the flight deck.
Dallas Air Boss number 2 reports also that it has the spacecraft in sight. It should be just a matter of very few minutes now before we get word that the swim helicopters are over the site, and a decision then will be made as to whether to bring the astronauts out, bring them back by helo, or bring them aboard the Wasp in their spacecraft. Bernard Eisman aboard the carrier Wasp.
That's the next big decision we'll be waiting for, and it, as I suggested a moment ago, with the Wasp, Dallas Townsend says, expecting to have the spacecraft in sight in a few minutes and be able to reach it certainly well within the hour. It would certainly seem likely that Schirra and Safford would stay aboard. Mike Wallace, over there at our recovery plot board, has a former air boss with him. Mike?
Air Boss number 1, Walter, from the Gemini 5 flight, Gordon Cooper and Pete Conrad, Commander Ken Eklund. Commander Eklund, what's going on right now aboard that Air Boss airplane?
Well, right now it's probably a lot duller than it was about 5 minutes ago, Mike. Right now he's attempting, I'm sure, to get the swim helos into position and photographic helos. He's probably relaying information to Wasp, trying to vector them over as quickly as possible.
What's his function? What actually does he do? Now, he took off. We saw him take off from the Wasp about 50 minutes ahead of time. What takes place then in that 50 minutes until splashdown?
Well, he's the boss of the airborne aircraft in the primary recovery area. He has to control them, as it were, to maintain communications with them, make sure they're all moving in the same direction. But more basically, he is the Admiral's representative at the datum, on the scene, at the spacecraft area until such time as the Admiral gets there himself.
I see. Then he isn't his own boss. The Admiral, White last time, let's say, and William Leonard, Admiral Leonard this time, is the overall boss of this task group.
Oh, very definitely.
And you report to him.
Right.
And you amount to a traffic cop, a communications director, and on-scene commander.
Right. Of course, in the event that you're unable to communicate with the Admiral, then you're required then to go ahead and exercise your own best judgment, and in this particular time, you are the boss. But as soon as the Admiral can communicate with you again, he takes over where he left off.
Thank you very much, Commander Ken Eklund. We now have the actual splashdown point, Walter. This little black wafer beside the Wasp. Let's say that the Wasp, well, it should be, actually, the Wasp should be on the other side of it. It's still steaming toward it. But it is at 23 degrees, 41 minutes north, 68 degrees, 30 minutes west. In the western part, 30 miles off the intended splashdown point, slightly west on its way to Cape Kennedy.
It was well within the footprint, wasn't it?
Yes.
And 30 miles is still so much closer than the other Geminis. It's almost half again as close as the best previous one, 56 miles, and Gemini 4, McDivitt and White, came down that close after White's spacewalk. Gemini 3 was 60 miles off, twice as far as this Gemini 6. Gemini 5 was a whopping 103 miles, but that's when his computer went out and he couldn't gauge his bank factor. That was Gus Grissom's flight, and certainly was not Gus's fault in any sense of the word. It was an equipment failure. Paul Haney has just told us through mission control that the parachute is still afloat, and the astronauts have said we're in great shape. Wonderful word from Schirra and Safford. We're in great. The swimmers are in the water. at the spacecraft and are at this moment attaching the flotation collars, as far as we know. We will hear, I'm sure, Paul Haney coming up from time to time on here now with further information from Mission Control in Houston, from which the information aboard the WASP is being relayed. The WASP's air boss sends us information, as just heard, back to the carrier.
Chris Graff has just advised that apparently our impact prediction that we have been going with earlier was incorrect. We have additional radar data from Grand Turk now being analyzed, which shows the landing took place 12 miles downrange from the WASP instead of 30 to 35 miles uprange, as we earlier reported. This is based on the latest data coming to us via Grand Turk. A 12-mile overshoot is what it looks like right now.
Well, that's even better than we had thought, twice as good as we had thought, 12 miles away. And it again brings up the interesting question about why these impact points are so unpredictable, and even after the landing, they don't seem to know exactly where it is. We've gone through this same exercise every one of these landings. They change it by as much as 40 and 50 miles from their first predictions. Now here's Bernard Eisman on the WASP.
The WASP advises the spacecraft is 11 to 12 miles dead ahead of our bow.
We're steaming there now at flank speed, 32 miles, and we see the helos, I understand, hovering over the spacecraft in just seconds. We should be able to see it with the naked eye. Dallas Townsend, up topside, any view yet?
Yes, indeed. Up here from the 07 level, we can see the helos hovering over the spacecraft. It's still about 12 miles away, as you say, Bernie, and we're approaching now at about 28 knots, which means that we're slowing down just slightly. 12 miles ahead, we should be there in a few minutes. The spacecraft is on the water. Come aboard the carrier Wally. Anybody in the military will be only too happy to honor. There are at least 2 helicopters, 20 minutes from now, we should be alongside the spacecraft. Now, we don't know yet whether the astronauts have elected to remain in the spacecraft or come out of it. But the fact that the WASP will be at the scene in 20 minutes indicates they may very well remain inside the spacecraft. Dallas Townsend aboard the carrier WASP.
The astronauts have told us that they're in great shape. Presumably the flotation collar being attached right now, and the astronauts will be emerging from their the hatch there. If they choose to open the hatch, which we assume they will, the heat builds up in those spacecraft, 3,000 degrees on the outside, and it's a great tribute to the life support system of the spacecraft that it doesn't get any warmer than a little over 100 degrees inside the spacecraft, and the spacesuits themselves stay below 100 degrees. But once the spacecraft has hit the water, the life support system, the air conditioning, does not function that efficiently, and the outside heat of the spacecraft begins to permeate, and it gets pretty darn hot inside, very hot indeed. Haney has just said that the pilots have elected to stay in the spacecraft until they're on board the WASP. They will stay aboard. 20 minutes yet.
Fine shape.
I'll be with you in a second. Over that again, will you? The WASP heading in the southeast direction.
Pilots in good shape. Schirra and Safford bobbing there in their spacecraft where they're going to stay for 20 minutes. It's a little less than that now, about 17 minutes until the WASP comes alongside and lifts them aboard. Mike Wallace, could Admiral Don White perhaps, I don't want to put him on the spot, you can tell me if he doesn't feel free to answer the question, why this estimate of where the spacecraft is down on the ocean varies so much. They've got all this radar equipment, and they say it's down on one spot. Then 5 minutes later, they say, oh, no, it's 30 miles over somewhere else. And then another 10 minutes, they come in and say, well, we were right the first time, except it's 5 miles another way. Just a moment.
We're advised that one of the swimmers has inflated a life raft just off, very close to the spacecraft, and the other 2 swimmers, they operate in teams of 3, are moving out near the spacecraft to retrieve the R&R section, the re-entry and rendezvous section, which contains electronics and other elements which we're very interested in getting back, which will give us a good deal of information on the total re-entry performance of this Gemini 6 spacecraft. This is Houston standing by.